Welcome to The Silent Verdict.
With Clara Monroe and Elias Gray. Imagine tuning into your favorite radio station. Maybe you're grooving to some tunes. And then months down the line, you find out the DJ wasn't even human.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. What's fascinating is how knowing that after the fact, it just fundamentally changes how you think about that voice you let into your car or your home, you know.
Okay, so let's really dig into this. We're doing a deep dive on this story about a Sydney radio station, CADA. They did something pretty bold, maybe. They used an AI host for 6 months.
6 whole months.
And didn't tell anyone. Our info comes from a report in the Sydney Morning Herald, and it's definitely kicked off a lot of discussion about audio's future.
It really makes you pause, especially when you think about how personal radio often feels.
Exactly. So our mission today really is to get a handle on what this all means, the implications of this hidden AI. What are the legal questions, the ethical ones, and what does it signal for, the future of audio and your own listening?
Okay, so where did this happen?
Right, let's set the scene. We're talking about Sydney, Australia. The station is CADA, and this happened for about 6 months.
And CADA broadcasts across Western Sydney, plus online through iHeartRadio. So it's not some tiny little operation. They've got reach.
Definitely. A station with that kind of audience.
Yeah.
Using AI secretly is, it's quite something. So what was this AI actually doing?
Well, this AI host, it presented a 4-hour hip-hop block, weekdays, starting at 11 a.m.
4 hours a day. Wow.
Yeah, think about that. That's a big chunk of the workday soundtrack for potentially thousands of people, curated and, well, voiced by an AI.
It's almost hard to picture. And what did the listeners know? Were there any hints?
And that's the kicker. 0 hints. At no point during the show or on the website, nothing was it mentioned this DJ was AI.
So just present it as normal?
Completely. The website just had the usual stuff, playing the hottest tracks from around the world for people at work, commuting, uni.
Like any other DJ description.
Exactly. Nothing to suggest it wasn't a real person behind the mic.
The total lack of transparency is definitely a huge part of this. It wasn't like an open experiment. So how did they pull this off? What was the tech?
Okay, so AR and Media, they own CADA, and also big names like KISS FM, the Gold Network, they confirmed they used a platform called 11 Labs.
11 Labs, right. I've heard of them. They do that generative AI audio stuff.
Exactly. They convert text to speech, but it's very sophisticated. It's not like your basic sat-nav voice. We're talking pretty lifelike, nuanced audio.
So a high-quality AI voice, but where did the actual voice come from? Was it purely synthesized or?
Well, this is another layer, isn't it? The voice, and apparently even some of the vocal style, was cloned from a real person.
Cloned? From who?
From an employee within ARN's own finance team, a guy named Ty.
Wait, someone in finance, his voice was used for the AI DJ?
Yep, that's what the report says. Imagine finding that out.
That just raises so many questions right there. Okay, so 6 months, an AI using a cloned human voice, playing music, maybe sounding like it's interacting, and nobody knew. What about the rules, the legal side?
Well, this is where it gets interesting, legally speaking, or perhaps unclear. The Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA, they're the regulator down there. They basically said there aren't currently any specific rules about using AI in broadcast content like this.
No specific rules. So no requirement to tell listeners.
At that time, no. No existing legal requirement for CADA to disclose they were using an AI host.
So technically, they weren't breaking any broadcasting laws by keeping it quiet.
That seems to be the situation as it stood then.
Yeah.
Now, ARN, when asked, their spokesperson said they were exploring how new tech could enhance the listener experience.
Enhance. Okay.
They mentioned getting valuable insights from this trial with Ty's voice, so it sounds very much like an experiment.
They also pointed out that, broadcasters everywhere are looking at this tech. Which is fair enough, but they also said the trial reinforced the power of real personalities.
Which is interesting, isn't it? It sort of implies, yeah, the tech's cool, but maybe that human connection is still pretty important for compelling radio.
Yeah, it suggests they learned something, maybe about the limits of the AI or the value of actual people.
Could be.
And the spokesperson also mentioned that policies are being developed in Australia now, led by the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, looking at safe and responsible AI use.
Right. Things like potential mandatory guardrails for transparency, especially in what they call high-risk settings, and maybe some voluntary safety standards coming later this year.
So the rule book might be catching up soon?
It certainly looks that way. Tech moves fast, regulation tends to follow. This case probably added some fuel to that fire.
Okay, let's shift to the arguments this whole thing stirred up. A big one, obviously, is about disclosure. Should listeners have been told?
Definitely. The vice president of the Australian Association of Voice Actors was pretty clear on this. They talked about needing legislation around AI labeling.
Labeling, like knowing what you're listening to.
Exactly. Yeah. Their point was authenticity and truth are so important for broadcast media, and crucially, the public deserves to know what the source is. Hard to argue with that basic principle, really.
Yeah, that trust between a station and its audience seems pretty fundamental.
And then there's another angle, brought up by a voice actress named Lim. She talked about the impact on underrepresented groups.
How so?
Her point was that for groups like, say, Asian Australian female presenters who already find it tough to break into broadcasting, well, using an AI like this, undisclosed, feels like it takes away one of those already scarce opportunities.
Oh, right. So it's not just about the listener, but about who gets to be on air, who gets those jobs. That's a really important perspective.
It highlights that potential downstream effect, yeah. If AI becomes a default cost cutter, who misses out?
Now, it's worth pointing out this wasn't the very first AI on Aussie radio, was it?
No, that's right. A couple of years back, Disrupt Radio introduced an AI newsreader, Debbie Disrupt.
But the difference there was
Transparency. From day one, everyone knew Debbie was AI. It was like part of the gimmick, almost.
okay, so that was up front. This Caddis situation was the opposite.
Precisely. And it wasn't just Australia. There was that station in Oregon in the U.S. back in 2023 that also used an AI host. I think that one was even based on a real presenter they already had.
Right, so CATA wasn't maybe the absolute first, but the combination of factors. Major market, big station, long duration, and the complete secrecy. That's what made this one really blow up, it seems.
Yeah, the scale and the lack of disclosure in a prominent setting really sharpened those ethical questions.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. What about the radio industry itself? Some people argue that, well, radio quality has been kind of slipping anyway.
There's definitely that perspective. Lots of consolidation, stations owned by big networks, competition from podcasts, streaming. It puts pressure on costs.
And one way they cut costs is voice tracking, right? Can you quickly explain what that is?
Sure. Voice tracking is basically when a DJ pre-records their talk breaks, the bits between songs. They might record links for multiple stations or for shows airing later.
So it sounds live, but it isn't actually happening in real time in the studio for that specific broadcast.
Exactly. It saves money, lets one DJ cover more ground, but you lose that live spontaneity. They can't react to, say, sudden news or a change in the weather or interact genuinely with callers in that moment.
Right. You can feel a bit canned sometimes, maybe.
Less authentic.
Some listeners definitely feel that way. And this brings up that idea of quality slippage.
Explain that, like a downward spiral.
Sort of. The analogy is like a restaurant. They try to save money, use cheaper ingredients, food quality drops, fewer customers come, so they cut costs more.
And it just gets worse.
Right. The argument here is if stations cut costs by using things like undisclosed AI, sacrificing that human element, does it make the product less appealing? Does it push listeners towards Spotify or podcasts where maybe they feel there's more authenticity, or at least they know what they're getting? It's a potential risk, for sure, if people feel deceived or disconnected.
But then we hit the big unknown in this Caddis story.
Which is?
The ratings. Did people actually notice? Did the numbers go up, down, stay the same?
Ah, right. The report mentioned the AI host reached 72,000 people in the last rating survey, which sounds okay, but what does it mean?
Exactly. 72,000 compared to what? Compared to the human host before, compared to other shows on CADA. Was the station overall trending up or down? Without that comparison, we just don't know if the AI was a success or a failure, purely in terms of audience numbers.
We're missing that crucial piece of data to judge the listener's verdict, so to speak.
Absolutely. Did they care? Did they even notice? We can only speculate without that data.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the key moments, the turning points here. First, obviously, the decision to deploy the AI host back in November.
And then letting it run for 6 months under the radar. That duration is pretty significant.
Shows the tech could blend in, I guess.
Seems so. Then the second point. The story's starting to break, thanks to questions from Stephanie Coombs in the Carpet newsletter.
Right, the media asking questions. That often gets the ball rolling.
Indeed. Which led to the third point. ARN Media confirming it. Yes, we used 11 lambs. Yes, we cloned Ty's voice. That public admission.
Which opened the floodgates for the wider discussion.
And that leads to the fourth point. The public and industry reaction. All the talk about transparency, ethics, jobs, everything we've been discussing.
The fallout, essentially.
Yeah.
So when we talk about a verdict, legally, what was the outcome for CADA? Any fines, any sanctions?
Well, as we said, based on the rules of the time, it seems no specific broadcasting laws were broken in Australia regarding undisclosed AI. ACMA confirmed that. So no formal legal verdict of wrongdoing.
Okay, no legal penalties then. But what about the bigger picture? What's the main thing we should take away from this whole episode?
I think the biggest takeaway is just how fast this tech is moving and how it's forcing these conversations on the media world. This case really throws a spotlight on the urgent need to talk about and maybe regulate transparency and ethics around AI in content creation.
Yeah, the rules need to catch up to the reality.
Definitely. And it pushes a question back onto you, the listener. What do you value most? Is it purely the content, the music choice, the information? Or is that human connection, that feeling of authenticity, just as important or maybe even more important in your listening experience?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Because as this AI gets better and better, how are we even going to tell the difference between a human creator and an artificial one?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
And maybe more fundamentally, what right do we have to know the source of the stuff we consume, the voices we hear? So yeah, an AI DJ spun tunes for half a year, most people none the wiser. It really makes you wonder, in this world just saturated with content, what's actually real anymore? And what does that mean for the human voices we've always relied on?
It's definitely a brave new audio world out there.
And it feels like we've only just scratched the surface with this one. What do you think happens next?